Welcome everyone to this very special meeting today. This is being hosted by ADRRN with a very strong support from our other network partners, GNDR and NIA. But equally important is the original host of the Humanitarian Encyclopedia, the University of Geneva Center for Humanitarian Studies, and we are joined by colleagues from there. And our facilitators for this whole exercise, Peer Connect, too is with us. So welcome everyone. All of you have been in some way associated with the process. So I'm not going to go into too much of a detail about what the project is, but just to give you a big picture of what we intend doing. So Meghna, maybe we can remove the slides for now. Yeah. So, so the big picture, you would have guessed in some way, it is about how do we expand and be more inclusive about the language, the nuances of words and terms that we often use in the humanitarian world. We use them because we've learned it from somewhere, we have read it in reports, but sometimes we also do not realize what are those cultural nuances of some of these terms, some of these words that have become very much part of our usual language. And so this project, which was initiated by the Humanitarian Encyclopedia project of the University of Geneva, made that attempt of trying to bring together what are those different forms and impressions that the terms which we use very often in the humanitarian world have meanings of, you know. And when we take this whole concept to a particular region, then it becomes even more interesting, because then we are looking at what are the language interfaces. Sometimes we find that a particular word that we've been using in English reports do not find a similar meaning when translated into our local language, and it kind of gives a completely different connotation. So our idea finally to do this kind of exercise is to make a beginning of becoming more inclusive, and try and see how we can start expanding the concept of including these local cultural nuances under a same umbrella of terms. So what would a word like vulnerability mean in Bangla? And shouldn't that be also included in the standard terminology and the lexicography that we developed for that kind of term? So that is the final attempt. And this is a great beginning to this consortium that we are building around these concepts of the humanitarian world. And today is culmination of one major milestone of the activity that we initiated in July this year. And I'm very pleased that we are today discussing the outcomes of those 4 months of very intense involvement of our working group members of ADRRN, members who really devoted their time and effort in contributing to the development and the expansion of this encyclopedia project. So with those words, let me now hand over to Alex, my colleague. Alex is from the University of Geneva. They are the original holders of this project. I was invited as an advisory board chair for this project, and that's how I've been associated with the encyclopedia for now nearly 5 years. And I have high regard to the original intention and the objective that the university colleagues have on this particular project. So over to you, Alex. Take us through this journey of the Humanitarian Encyclopedia, what it is, and what do you envisage globally. And then we will come down to the particular exercise later, where our colleagues from Peer Connect will tell us how we've been able to already localize some of those elements of the encyclopedia. So welcome once again, and over to you, Alex.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Manu, for the fantastic introduction. I think it's very nicely put the vision and the potential of where this project can go with a more local lens, and especially finding ways to capture the richness that comes out when you really get down to the local level, like the meaning of words in Bangla or whichever local language or dialect, and trying to find a way that can be meaningfully integrated into even the global discourse or the regional level discourse, and that we can all benefit from these perspectives. So I thought that was really nicely done. So yeah, I will just talk a little bit more generally about the project. I'm sure that many of you here on the call today are aware somehow of the encyclopedia and what it looks like. So I'll just briefly run over the sort of features, not in too much detail. And then I'll try and get towards, I think one point around why is it actually important and interesting to develop a shared understanding across this rich, diverse landscape that is the humanitarian sector. And yeah, just elaborate in a bit more detail on the vision of this consortium building phase, and where the project's been, what's the state of the platform now, and then how we can sort of envisage a consortium evolving in the next weeks and months. And yeah, so that's a bit the overview. So what is the encyclopedia? When you come to the Humanitarian Encyclopedia website, this is essentially what you find. It's a online platform, a collaborative online platform to co-produce concepts and develop and apply knowledge that guides an effective humanitarian response. So the general idea is that we have a section of the website where there's a big list of concepts, and these concepts were developed with the input of practitioners from all across the world, as well as through analyzing the documents that humanitarian organizations write, and a big survey of over 1,000 humanitarian practitioners on what are the terms that are interesting and relevant to you. So this kind of participatory research process helped us develop a sort of broad framework about what are the concepts that define the humanitarian sector. But obviously within that list, there's a lot of nuance that needs to be unpacked. And so, excuse me. So on the concept section, you can go into a page for each concept and learn about the definition or the multiple definitions that come up in relation to that concept, and many other bits of information and knowledge about the concept. And there's some other features like a blog, or we call it expertise notes, where practitioners and researchers can sort of share their knowledge or expertise about a concept, maybe what it looks like in practice, or a theoretical angle, or bringing academic kind of thinking into a more accessible language. So the blog is quite interesting. And then there's some databases. So we have a big document textual analysis component or methodology to this project. So we provide a lot of those documents. There's also just resources that you can read, and databases that map the humanitarian sector. So if we're trying to define the language of the humanitarian sector, then we also need to know who are humanitarians. And so that research process has developed a big database of organizations that are humanitarian. And then the final bit is kind of the most interesting or relevant in terms of what this pilot project in the Asia region is all about, which is the forum. And the idea of the forum is really to discuss and debate the concept such that, okay, there's one page where the shared and consolidated knowledge describes the various perspectives and definitions of the concept. But there's another space where practitioners can come together and share exactly those insights about, well, when we translate whichever concept into the local language, what we really mean is something a bit different. And then someone from another region or another dialect could come and say, well, that's a bit different to the way we use the concept. And you can sort of envisage this discussion happening in a thread that builds on top of the previous answer. Maybe people like it, it's quite an interactive kind of vision. And on the platform, we have really nice features for that, but we also learned that sometimes these discussions happen more naturally in the technologies and softwares and modalities that practitioners and people are used to using. And so through the project with Peer Connect and ADRRN, we've seen that this type of conversation can be really fruitful if it's steered appropriately, and like there's a good moderator, and if it's done in the technologies that people are used to using, whether that's email or Google Groups or however. So although the platform has a great forum feature, I think what's really exciting is that discussion can happen anywhere or anyhow. It's about capturing then the findings from that knowledge and re-infusing them into the encyclopedia concept pages. So that's a bit about the concepts, the platform, sorry. And our vision is to sort of develop this shared understanding, because we believe that will improve the effectiveness and efficiency and the ultimate outcomes of the humanitarian response. So when you come onto a concept page, it's sort of, you land on something like this. So the concepts can be one word or multiple words. Something like do no harm is obviously a really important multi-word concept in the humanitarian world. And you get a sort of textual overview, which summarizes all the research inputs and whichever discussions and debates that have been had on the concept. And then you have, sorry, it's a bit cut off, but you have then a fold out menu where you can really drill down into a lot more detail if you wish. But we've been always conscious in this project to present the results in a way that is easily digestible by a wide range of audience types. So we try to keep the overview fairly simple and not too much text. But I think even then, as we take increasingly local agenda, it's important to experiment with new media and new formats for communicating, as an encyclopedia or dictionary type knowledge. And so this year we've been working on a project to create little videos, and I thought it could be instructive to show you what that output can look like. It's for a different concept, it's for data. But I think this gives a real nice sense of where we would like to go in terms of the output of the knowledge.
What is data? Data is an important part of humanitarian programs and decision-making. Common sources of humanitarian data include questionnaires, case studies, meetings, focus groups, interviews, and household surveys. Data is also collected through direct observation, biological measurement, or aerial and satellite imagery. The internet and social media also contain vast data, which may be useful for humanitarian response. Humanitarians have developed specialized methodologies and tools for collecting, analyzing, and managing data. In an emergency setting, data needs to be processed rapidly and continuously.
In protracted settings, data collection may become more periodical and detailed. With multiple, sometimes conflicting data sources, it is important to triangulate data to make sense of the situation. As data has grown more prevalent in humanitarian operations, teams and organizations have begun to specialize in data activities. In addition, humanitarians have formed partnerships, frameworks, and models to collaborate on data and share best practices.
Despite these efforts, humanitarians commonly face data gaps about specific demographic groups or affected areas.
Such gaps limit the understanding of complex situations and can lead to worse outcomes for vulnerable populations who are left hidden from the view of responders. The data that humanitarians do obtain also faces challenges. Data may be biased towards certain groups or preconceptions. Delays can also quickly leave data irrelevant.
Different datasets may lack comparability or may be siloed within one organization. One crucial challenge for humanitarian data involves maintaining the privacy and security of data about vulnerable populations. Another requires addressing unequal access to data resources and technology among humanitarians.
To learn more, visit humanitarianencyclopedia.org.
So that's an example of how we can go from text to video or audio output, and I think engage a much wider range of audience. So that's nice. Now the challenge is that this video is sort of based on our analysis of the text documents, and I think Steve might go into more detail as he explains the method and findings of the consultations with the ADRRN. But it's kind of largely based on our text analysis of humanitarian documents, and most humanitarian documents are written by organizations that have, let's say, a more Geneva or global centric perspective and language, and so I think the videos are great in terms of communicating the knowledge. But what I would love to reach is a type of video that integrates the sorts of findings and discussions that you've been having over the past months, but communicates it in not just a big heavy text document, but not to imply that the findings are written in a big heavy text document, but as a more traditional encyclopedia kind of knowledge is written in big text. It's great if we can somehow visualize that and disseminate it as videos or something similar. So that's a bit on the content of the encyclopedia, what we have and where we're going, exploring new video modalities. I wanted to make a brief point about why is it actually important to develop a shared understanding from all these diverse perspectives. And I have a few slides that might just elaborate on that. So we hear this all the time that humanitarian organizations and humanitarian practitioners would love to have a shared understanding of concepts. There's a big debate all the time and now in relation to Gaza on what does neutrality mean, or in Ukraine that was another key debate. It can mean different things in different contexts. Humanity is a core concept, but there's actually multiple definitions of it. Terms, very specific legal terms like refugee and migrant, are hotly debated amongst humanitarian practitioners about what they really mean and what are the implications of those meanings and definitions. And there seems to be this constant desire that, well, we need to find consensus. We can't just be debating the terms all the time. We need to have a consensus-based definition and use this to then implement practice. So there's diverse understandings, but somehow a desire for one. So there's kind of two ways to meet that need, and I think the common way that it's been done is to provide a glossary or a taxonomy or or a dictionary or an encyclopedia. And this kind of like will make some kind of decision about what is the definition, and provide it as short and concisely and clearly as possible. And you can see that in just one example of Relief Web glossary, where this particular definition of a concept of humanity emphasizes this idea of protecting life and health. That's a definition that we share on our platform as well. And if you ask practitioners, in one sample, but generally there's a good amount of practitioners who adhere to this definition of humanity. But of course, there's other definitions of humanity, and this other one emphasizes treating everyone humanely and equally. So it puts more emphasis on the equality aspect. And it's a subtle but important difference when you think about what that really means in terms of humanitarian practice and decision making. And again, you know, a good third of people find that, yes, this is the definition of humanity. And so on a platform like the Encyclopedia, where you can incorporate multiple different perspectives, you know, we can retain that knowledge. But if you have to boil it down to one clear, concise, simple definition that has a lot of practical benefits, but you end up in the situation where sometime into the future, we'll be debating, yeah, but you know, for me, humanity isn't about protecting life and health. It's about treating everyone humanely and equally. And so you run into, again, a coordination dilemma where we're talking over or around each other and not talking to each other. So it's a little bit of a demonstration why we sort of think that it's important to build a genuinely shared understanding, which can allow multiple definitions rather than a singular. This is the definition. And then the final bit of my presentation is just to outline a little bit our vision for this next phase of the consortium, this consortium building phase. And it helps to look back to go forwards sometimes. So as I mentioned, the project was launched and Manu has been there since early days, advising, especially bringing a lot of local perspective to the governance of the project. And it was sort of launched as a research project, but that had a big participatory element to try and map the humanitarian sector and identify what are the central concepts from a broad base of perspectives. And then we worked on developing the online platform that I just showed you a few snapshots of. And this was really more like a technological project to really create the infrastructure and tool that could allow an online space and community to flourish and exchange knowledge. But as a kind of small center in a university, and our core business is research and teaching, our strength is not around growing a huge community of users and engaging the community in that sense. And so we kind of realized that limitation, and we need to build some kind of consortium model where the people who would like to use the platform are also implied in its governance and its direction and steering. And so we think some kind of consortium model can allow for this and empower the people who need to use the platform and who can grow the platform, because you have wide practitioner memberships and wide base of users. And so that's a bit the idea where we would like to go with the platform. And so if you can picture what this looks like, is a global community with humanitarian practitioners at the local level, at the international level, researchers. I think it will always have a strong research evidence-based element to this project, and researchers, we are increasingly collaborating with local universities or universities in regions affected by crisis, and so those would be potential members of the community. Newcomers, I think this is a really useful tool for people who don't know the humanitarian sector. They come from the private sector and would like to bring their innovation or technologies to help achieve humanitarian goals. Journalists who are reporting on crises, development actors who are trying to bridge the nexus, or peace building actors who are trying to bridge the nexus. And affected populations who have every right to understand, the language and the jargon that's used in their response, the response that, is trying to help. And people can come as learners, they can come as contributors, and we need more leadership. And this is also where the consortium and governance question comes in. So there's kind of 3 steps to that process, where we establish the consortium. So we come together, we get inputs, and we decide on what is the actual governance model. And then through that, we grow local networks, online, but in person, or on the platform itself, or in other online fora, like what we used for this pilot with ADRRN. And then we sustain that knowledge. So we set in place workflows whereby we circle back to the knowledge after some months or some years, such that okay, well, this was the definition we arrived. Does it still hold? And maybe just a final slide to really indicate why that's crucial. Circle back is actually, this one's better. When we look at where these concepts come from and how dynamic they are, you can see a concept like participation has been used pretty consistently and slightly more over, nearly 15 years. There's some little anomalies because this data was not fully cleaned yet, so you can ignore that. But you see that, the word is used in the humanitarian documents and language quite regularly for a long time. But the case for localization is really different. It's a term that wasn't even talked about in the humanitarian language for a long time, and then quite sort of suddenly spiked around this World Humanitarian Summit and the Agenda for Humanity, and has increased since. And again, the data collection stopped, so that's why it suddenly dropped. So these kind of indications just show you that, these concepts, they're coming, new concepts are coming into the language, but maybe they're coming too much from the top. And it would be great if we can find a way to have a chart that brings, that shows a clear introduction of Bangla concepts, as the example was earlier, or, really, really locally grounded concepts, into the mainstream discourse that they're being used in Geneva and New York, having come from the ground up. So that's what I think this consortium model could concretely bring. So apart from that, I think we're a bit behind schedule, but thanks for listening, and look forward to the activities ahead. But especially, I think the next step with the meeting in Bangkok will be really nice to exchange further on how this could work and what it will look like with you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. That was wonderful. Yes, it took a little extra time, but I think it was all worth it, because you explained the process very well and also gave us some direction on where you see this needs to go. Is there any burning question to Alex? Otherwise, I'll hand it over to Nupur and Steve. Any questions? Raise of hands. I don't see any. Okay, so in interest of time, Alex, thank you very much. what I liked about this, the future direction is the part around empowering and growing, and making this a shared understanding and not a singular understanding that kind of comes from the top. So thank you very much for that. Nupur, please take over and help us with the project progress so far. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Meghna, can we have the slides, please? I'll invite Steve to start and we'll do it together. Thank you, Steve.
Okay. Hi, everybody. It's Steve Glavinsky. And I've been involved, Nupur and I have been involved in seeing what we could do with this proposal to take Alex's vision further and Manu's vision further. So we did this in, what was it, earlier in this year, came up with a proposal to try it out. That's the idea of coming up with a consortium and to see what happens on the shared understanding of the three concepts of the encyclopedia. So we did a pilot for three concepts, and we saw what would happen there. And we used the discussion approach. We had we asked ADRRN, or Meghna did, to come up with identify some people that could form a working group to have to try this out. And we got the working group. We had 26 people, and we gave them 3 of the 129 concepts to explore in a discussion format. And Nupur was moderating it, and she did to get everybody to respond and so on. So it was a lot of effort there. But the idea here is to, once we now have the results of the 3 pilot terms, and I'll go into that next, but the idea now is to take it forward. And if I could just go to the next slide. Meghna, I guess this is your slides, right? Just next slide. Yeah. So this is a work plan of the project. We're a little behind, but not too bad. The shared understanding is the first output, and we have done the convening of the working group on the concepts. We're now having a consultation with a wider group of professionals, and the idea here is to get more consensus behind our findings, so that we just don't say we had a working group that did this. We come back and we say we had a wider group from Asia looking at it and ideally supporting it and endorsing it. So then once we have that, we'll do the finalizing of the process here, and we bring it to the Regional Partnerships Week in December. There'll be a presentation there. We'll have an hour to talk to the plenary about our findings to get more support for this, because this is it's just a pilot. We developed a model, and now we want to see if we can really get it going. And Alex's idea is quite visionary. We're looking at not just an encyclopedia that sits in Geneva. We're looking at any organization in the humanitarian and even beyond, anybody involved in disaster mitigation events. If you have your Red Cross and you see the term localization in one of the publications, there'll be a link under it, and you can click the link and go into see what the encyclopedia says. And so this is really taking this further. It's hopefully a transformational concept to make the industry, so to speak, the sector, everybody talking with the same voice. When you have these concepts like that, everybody means the same thing. You can do so much more better monitoring it and comparing them and identifying in the reports. Just everybody would know what you would mean. So that was the original idea. So once we have that, then we go with the next 2 outputs. We're going to determine the viability and the value, which is making the case. And we'll do a poll. There'll be a poll at the end of this session, which I'll organize, to determine the interest in this. and then do the proposal. And then we document it as a process model, because if it's interesting, this is just Asia. We can take it to Latin America and the other organizations as well. And so that's the idea. So just let me do a little bit on the findings. I think the interesting thing is there was a brief that was circulated for the meeting, and basically I'll refer to that. I think the interesting thing here is that we did it, you know, the encyclopedia, when we first took a look at it, it is what Alex said. A lot of it is done, you know, we have now 5,000 publications. That's what it, and what it does is you feed the 5,000 publications into we call it a natural language aggregator, and it comes up with all the terms in those documents. No, we don't need that yet, Manu, Meghna. Yeah, that's fine. We can go back or stop sharing or whatever.
Yeah, I think we can stop sharing, Meghna. Let Steve. Yeah.
There we go. Okay, that's good. Yes. So the idea here was 5,000 documents was the course. Of course, there were other consultations and discussions and so on. And so the natural language aggregator took the terms that were used in these publications, and it came up with these with you know what the humanitarian ones, the most referenced terms and their context and what reference they are. And so that was the basis for the encyclopedia. And so what we did with our idea of discussing them was a little bit of a different approach. We instead of using the document in the encyclopedia, we talked about it, and the people who have the terms, localization, what they saw. And most of these people, you know, they didn't do the publishing. You know, they talk to the communities, but they don't publish. So their voice was kind of missing in the documentation. And when you go to some of the maps on the terms, there's one of the maps, he did an amazing job with the analysis of these. One map show you where the references are. And you know, they put circles on where the terms are from. And of course, the European circle is very large, and the other ones are smaller because that's where a lot of the publications came from. So the discussion forum, first of all, brought out this idea of coming up with another way of looking at it. I mean, the basis is the documentation, but now we have something that we can build on. And the second point was to, as Manu mentioned, what about the local NGOs, right? This is not the international NGOs. The local NGOs, would they have a different perspective? They're not in the publications as much. So let's see what they had to say about it. And that was what was so interesting and striking about the exercise, because when we did that, we did find a differentiation. Each of the terms that we tried had a different insight. Like localization was an excellent point, because when you look at the terms and you read about it, you know, the grand bargain and everything, it's all about strategy. How do we get our money to local NGOs? And when you look at localization from the NGOs and the conversation we had, it was more of a principle. Everything we do is localized. You know, we have to constantly discuss with the communities. And for us, localization would not just mean giving us money from the big donors. It would mean also making sure that we had the capacity and the authority to do this. So it's a broader concept, and the grand bargain just covers how much money are you giving, and of course it's held up because a lot of the larger donors don't trust the local NGOs to spend their money. So the implications there is then what you do is you have to build the trust. You have to give the local organizations capacities so that you have a higher confidence that the money will be spent better. And that's what happens when you have a discussion as opposed to doing the books. The second one that we found was some of the entries. Again, the ones in the documents, impact, for example, it really focuses on development impacts, and there's a whole, you know, everything is defining what a development impact is, which is a very good discussion. I know, having been in the business for so long myself, impact is a term that you don't really have a put your handle on, but that's development implications. But what happened here was these are humanitarian organizations in disaster situations, and impact in disaster is a lot more immediate. It's how many lives you can save or mitigate disruptions, which is not development impacts or change of attitudes and helping benefits in the long term. So impact meant had a different dimension when you brought in the people on the ground and what they're doing in humanitarian issues. So that was the second finding. And the third one was when we talked about inclusion. And here it was very interesting because what happened was, I think everybody had the same idea of inclusion, but again, the local NGOs really stressed it. It was in their charters and everything else to be inclusive. And I think this is the type of thing that, if you look at the diagram and what the publications, it was all about social inclusion, which is again is a development goal. But here it goes beyond that. And so here's the type of opportunity, if you can bring this discussion wider, you bring the local organizations together with the large organizations, you would have more of an influence to cover things like inclusion and to get the larger organizations to see that it's not just social inclusion. It's a principle, and that would go into their design of their projects, that you have to address everybody and not just what do you do and who do you focus on? Where are the priorities? And so this is the way of identifying and bringing you into the conversation. And by you, I'm talking about the local organizations that were represented by ADRRN. And I think that's a key. And the final point, which in the brief I brought up, was the idea here, the local organizations are the ones that are talking to the communities. And in trying to interpret and identify the term, I can see it was obvious. They went through a lot of discussion about what it was because they had to translate it. They had to explain it. So they knew very clear. I was very impressed with the responses that came back and how insightful and nuanced they were. And I think, what you're doing here is essentially the local NGOs are working with the communities so that the communities get the understanding of the term. We're putting them on the page too, on the same page. And so it's a way of bringing in the communities into the discussion as well. The local organizations reflect their experiences in explaining these terms to communities, so they will have a better, they're very articulate ways of discussing it. So I think the idea here is, which we'll talk about, and we'll have after we open it to discussion, I'll ask you for a poll on this, is using this discussion approach. Now we have the basis from the documents. Let's move it to a discussion approach where we get much more insights from the people like the local organizations, and they have a seat at the table when a term comes up. So one of the people would say, how do you guys use the term vulnerability? And the discussion group would jump in and start talking about these things. So the local NGOs would say this, the larger NGOs would say that, and that's where you can come up with a common. You can set a little working group out, and they would come up with it and do that little voting thing that Alex showed, and say this is how we're going to interpret it. And that would be, again, everybody would link into that. The encyclopedia captures all the terms, and so you have it. And that's the discussion approach. So it's building a community, which is one of what we do in Peer Connect, of professionals who are interested in discussing the terminologies and building basically a lexicon that for the sector. And this could be ongoing as a community of practitioners and researchers and the others to come up with this. And the second thing, I think, which we have on this, again, is going back to the original idea of building a consortium. It's a co-ownership arrangement. So in other words, they've done a phenomenal amount of work getting this far, the Geneva Center. And now it's time to give it to the users and to give the users to buy into it, to own it, and to feel this is theirs, it's their responsibility, it's their sector, and they would be the ones to guide and define the terms. And so you're really assessing, if you think of a professional association, which is kind of where this goes, the terminologies would be, the ownership would be the representations from the communities, and they would be the ones to establish the definitions that everybody would use. So the co-ownership idea, and it's brought by the local organizations in these settings, would be the way to go. And I think it's an excellent opportunity to really look. For me, it's a big issue. You're transforming the humanitarian sector, and you're getting everybody lined up on these concepts. So I think I'll stop there. Talked a lot, but somebody else come in. I see a few people on the list from our working group. I'm interested to get some views from them too, if they have anything to add or to comment on this. And then when we finish, we'll give you the Mentimeter slides. And I also set up those questions that we asked the working group are also there. And if you like, you can take the survey, which I'll have, and I'll have a link to add your views on those the discussion questions that we ended up with. Okay, so that's it. Nupur, would you want to add anything? You were very active in this. You were the moderator.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. And thank you very much, everybody who has joined today. It's very encouraging to see all of, some of our working group members and experts in the panel here. So we've been engaged with this exercise for past few months, and Steve has just now shared about how the concepts evolved, how the terms evolved, how much depth was there in the contributions. I was the one who was facilitating these interactions with the working group members. So I want to share a bit of that, because as we look forward and think of forming a consortium, it needs both. It needs good content, it needs community. So we started with 29 organizations, 29 representatives from 16 organizations and 7 countries. And our approach, it was a 3-step approach where we started to learn about the concept. We asked, we did some questions, we shared the questions with the group one by one for the 3 topics. Then we compared, as Steve has shared, and then we framed the findings. So while the expectation was that, it will be a decent response, but actually the response was phenomenal. Out of 29 people who we had, many of them were also engaged in emergencies during these 3 months, especially Afghanistan and some other places. So we got a great number, and I feel as a facilitator, how many people respond and actively participate in a question is very important. So 15 to localization, 10 to impact, and 13 to inclusion out of a group of 29 representation. And mind you, they are also same organization, 3 people. That kind of thing was there. And so for us, it was very important to get all the perspectives together, because unless we did that, the exercise was futile. So I'm very happy to share that all 7 countries were represented in all the 3 concepts. So that was one, and thanks to our members of the working group, some of them are here today. And we've really felt that the group has co-owned and they have sharpened the terms. And one experience that I had as a facilitator, I've been into this, I've been either a facilitator or been with one for last 16 years. I think this group was very, 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 very engaging. And these deep experiences that came from the ground, the value these responses had, and the passion with which they were shared was really very fulfilling for me as a facilitator. And, the commitment, all of you who were there in the working group responded to my WhatsApps and mails and messages in spite of all the busy schedule. So I felt that, this level of trust comes in a community after a very long time. But this group already picked on to the passion that they have for their work, and they just jumped on the opportunity and responded. And I would encourage the other members who have joined today to look at the rich responses we got. We will at some point share. It's amazing, to see the depth and the detail of those responses. So I feel that there was a lot of trust among the members, and that's one very important thing to have as we go forward and think of the consortium. So this was just a demonstration of what potential this group can achieve. What is the potential here? And I'll stop here, saying that it was very, very enriching experience for both of us, Steve and me, to moderate this discussion. And very glad to see some of our working group members here, Dr. Hina, Mr. Vishal, Anand sir, and Mr. Zamira Noori. And then we have Mr. Takeshi also as an expert. So Steve, I'll hand it back to you for moderating this discussion, where we are looking forward to hear from all of our experts. Thank you.
Okay, before I hand it back to Mano for comments, just to point out, I think the members of the working group will gain appreciation of when you do these discussions, the role of the moderator. They don't just happen by themselves. You don't just say, okay, everybody comment. You have somebody who is guiding the discussion and calling them up and do all the work to get these results. It's just something that when I design these communities, and this is why we have so much, it's important to get a good skilled moderator, facilitator, we call it, as well. So that's it's a point, and I think it'll come up when we take this further in our proposal. Okay, let me stop there. Manu, you want to organize a Q&A?
Yes, so just to, I think it's best that if you and Nupur can, open this up for a discussion. But let me just have Takeshi as a discussion to share his immediate comments, if any, and any thoughts on possible future direction.
Yeah. Thank you, Manasan, and thank you, everyone. I think it's fascinating because it's also, the findings, I think it also sort of syncs with my experience and learning in this line of work also. I just want to share with you, like when we were doing this earthquake and tsunami nuclear disaster response in Japan in 2011. So we were dealing with these communities, and their community has this span of time in their thinking of 3 generations ahead of you. International organizations come, they have a span of like 3 months. So what I realized was that the more local you get, because it's about your existence, right? It's about your life and the community. The perspective becomes much longer and wider, and therefore, I think there were some interesting observation or findings from the initial research that localization, the term localization or inclusion, the INGO colleagues may tend to think very sort of narrow in scope, but the more local you get, it becomes wider in scope. And I think that's the truth in life. It's sort of the philosophy or the truth that we're finding in our work, which is not easily replicated in our sector, because our sector is still controlled by people who like to be in places like in the capitals and get a decent consistent pay, and it's not in their interest to really change the sector. So we have these people who are not, really motivated to change the sector, talk about this changing of the sector. That's why we're not getting anywhere. But I think so. The things that we're finding out with the communities, and I'm sure it's the same, Manasan, when you work with communities in India, I'm sure that the wisdom, the perspective of the community has much wider scope than like our humanitarian, staff who only focus on projects. So this has I think, potential of changing that perspective. And I think if this changes our perspective, then I think it changes our attitude. And if it changes our attitude, I think the money flow, how the decisions are being made, will also be influenced. So I would like to see that, and I would like to say in key forums, in the meetings, like the ministerial conference, also that because of these consultations, we have much richer definition of the words that we use in the sector. I think that'll be great. And if various organizations start to use, for example, it's also happening with CWS right now. There are some strategizing process going on at the US side, and then some places in Asia also. And there are like key definitions that we always sort of come back to. But instead of pulling that key definitions out from Prevention Web or these places, we would like to see these key definitions are always pulled out from Humanitarian Encyclopedia. I'll stop there. I don't know if I was stimulating a discussion or making a speech. Sorry.
No, I think this was great. I mean, and I completely resonate with you, Takeshi, on the how we can use such opportunities to really expand and bring in a much richer kind of range of understanding around these concepts. And while these discussions were going on, I also made an attempt to try and write something on inclusion as one of the three terms. And we did some consultations internally within the team, and I was surprised to see that how even a simple word inclusion that we use so often in our project design, in our project reporting, and even if we have to explain this to someone else who's part of the stakeholder group, we just assume that my understanding is the same as the understanding of the person on the other side, and it is not really so. And these kind of nuances were very obvious within the team. So imagine when that gets amplified at a larger system level. So creating this repository and, like you said, building on this shared understanding through the encyclopedia project is a wonderful way to go forward. And and it's not a one-time kind of effort. You can keep on adding. You can keep on enriching this on a continual basis as we also evolve with time. And one could see that in how Alex showed those little figures where localization was an unknown term until 2016, when the WHS, the World Humanitarian Summit, happened in Turkey, and suddenly it kind of spiked all over the world. So these things also happen with the external circumstances and how the system kind of responds to these circumstances. So great. Nupur, would you like to speak to also our working group members?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you, Manu. Thank you, Takeshi. We have working group members here. May I invite Ms. Samira Noori to share anything, share your reflections over the exercise you participated in mostly all the discussions. So please do share something if you at this point. Or you're here?
I don't think Samira is online
Samira
now.
has
She was
there.
Yeah, we have other members. Ms. Hina, would you like to share anything, Dr. Hina? Yeah, please.
Thanks, Nupur. And first and foremost, I'd like to thank you because you were the interface, and I think Steve was also thanking you because the moderator's role is very, very important and pivotal in, conveying the messages that we want to deliver. Thanks for all the support, the guidance in helping us unpack, demystify these concepts. I would like to agree with Manu when he was saying that this was a good opportunity within our own teams to talk to our global thematic experts on these three very important concepts. While we have been trying to integrate these and trying to understand that we know it all, it was a very good exercise. And let me thank all the other contributors in enriching my understanding about those concepts, because I would have otherwise never come to understand that we could also look at, for example, Rita was talking about inclusion, and she was, talking about all the other layers, like the institutional layer, the geographical layer, the knowledge inclusion, and how to kind of tomorrow's cities. Some really good concepts she has put across, and these were huge learnings for us as contributors, who were also sharing some of the learnings and some of the experiences which we have carried through these concepts, but also trying to learn from others. So that's what this exercise has done. And yes, we understand that during COVID, we were all grappling with very important, information and the concepts. And rather than going to some, some, as Takeshi was talking about, some relief web, we constitute a forum or a platform where all these concepts are, very clear to us. So thanks to everybody for the rich responses. And it's really heartening to know about this consortium model, which, Alex was talking about. I just had one humble submission on the safety security of data, which Alex was taking up in his session. For example, on the protracted conflict, we have a lot of data in hand. So how do we, envisage of unpacking those difficult complex, concepts also, understanding that we all are also reeling in different, all kinds of disasters and emergencies in and around us. So thanks to everybody, thanks to the organizers, ADRRN, for helping us understand and, increase our knowledge also. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheena. Alex, would you like to share anything at this point? Comment on the last question? Yeah.
Well, I guess I'm not sure I fully got if there's a question about the data security and privacy of data collected in discussion fora and then somehow used on the platform, or a broader question about the meaning and aspects of data that are relevant.
Done any, because there are 129 concepts. So is this being captured somewhere, or are there any understanding on this, or has there been any consensus or any harmonization of this concept?
So that's the second interpretation of your question, and it's the more interesting one. Well, they're both important. But I think so. The video was about data, and that's a broad concept. And some of these concepts in our list are extremely broad, like health. This is a huge topic. Data is a big one. And I think what I find interesting about it is that when this initial list of concepts was developed just a few years ago, maybe like the kind of understanding of data broadly across the sector was still fairly underdeveloped as it is today. And I think even today it's less developed than it needs to be. We need to get all of us need to get more data literate and aware of the pros and cons of privacy and security of data, where risks are really risks and where risks may actually be opportunities, and vice versa. So there's a lot of, I guess, capacity building to be done across the sector on how we use, interpret, and understand the concept of data. But I think just the point to make here is that, it shows the dynamism of these concepts that, okay, we just need to know what is data 5 years ago. But today we need to really dig down to your question, which is, well, what aspects of data security and data privacy do we need to be discussing, defining, standardizing, accepting cultural differences around, and all of these things. it's really something that's evolving, you know, the parts of the concept or the level of analysis of the concept that needs to be discussed. So I think it's a great example. I don't know if I have like the answer, but this is my kind of reaction to your question.
If I can add, it's a good topic. And what, if you notice, you know, if you have a discussion on these topics, this is where you know, this is another role of a moderator. If you notice, your responses didn't go right up. They got reviewed, the moderator posted them. So the moderator's role at some point is to keep them positive and constructive. And when we train moderators how to do that, how to take the names out and put, you know, in this district or a certain people or something like that. So you keep the discussion from getting off track or getting heated, because I think that's probably a little bit more disasters, human-made disaster, man-made disaster situations. You have to be careful to avoid getting anybody getting aggressive or anything else. Those types of things. You can keep the discussion civil and constructive, and that's part of the role of when you have these conversations, to keep that going. So that was just to add.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Thank you. May I invite Professor Hanan to please share his experience if you want to add anything at this point before we open the floor. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Actually, it is a big opportunity, and the flow from the inception up to now, the framework and the logical format to get the more understanding. So it is very interesting to get more understanding and more experience on particular topic. And I have a question on this, because we have enriched our understanding and we get more, it means new things from all around from other experts and the contributors. But I have a big question on how I can translate into local languages, because to understand we get more richness in the particular, just say inclusiveness. But when we translate put into our local language, we have to give more explanation. So it is another task. So how this humanitarian encyclopedia will provide a space from the local perspective. We can embed the local language into this project. It is one of my questions. Hope we can travel in future. We could edit up. Thank you very much. Very good opportunity. We can work together future.
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, this question also came up during the discussion. I was speaking to one of the working group members where they said that we don't use this term. This is not, you know, if I go to you know, an old person in the community and tell them about a disaster is coming, is going to happen, they don't understand. We have to tell them either it is fire or an earthquake. So, and similar was, you know, he shared one or two more experiences. So yeah, and then how do you really translate it into one local language and the context where people understand it? So that came up earlier also. Thank you for bringing it up, and thank you for your active participation, Mr. Hussain. So, Alex, Steve, Manu, would any one of you, Takeshi, would you like to respond to this? Any quick thoughts?
Well, let me just quickly say, yeah, that was, I think, one of the purposes of this, to, you know, that's what you bring to the table when you have a group to determine an understanding. You bring that perspective in. How do I explain this to my people? You know, that's your question. That's not a question, and it's a very important question, because they have to know what's happening. And how do I explain this to my people? It should be right at the top of every agenda. Whenever you put this term, somebody wants to talk about something, that's the way to go. And again, what I find is the translation of a concept into another language really gets you to think about the essence of the concept. It's the best way to figure out what you mean, is by trying to say, how do you say this in Bangla, right? That really, and that's what I pointed out in the report, that was evident in the responses, how much thought has gone into the concept, because you have to spend your time explaining it to the communities. And it's much more thinking than as Takeshi was saying, the people that sit in the capitals. They don't have to explain it. They go to their meetings, and at their level, they're talking the same thing, but they're missing the people who are affected by who the humanitarian organizations work for. And that's why your question should be the first one to come in. How do we explain this?
If I may also respond, in addition to what Steve said, it's also upon you, Steve, Hanan, and all my friends from the working in the front lines and on the at grassroots, is that this is the opportunity that we have before us to actually work backwards. Is to say that, well, this is what inclusion means in my culture, in my community, and I need a endorsement of this interpretation in the encyclopedia. And so by contributing your interpretation or your community's interpretation, you are actually enriching that concept of inclusion in the humanitarian encyclopedia. So, and the encyclopedia, by accepting that, is validating the interpretation that you bring to the table. So from that one understanding which we have from some textbooks to now a shared understanding that the word inclusion also has this nuance, which is very much Sri Lankan, is also part of the sort of definition of this word. This is the vision that we are trying to reach.
Yeah, thank you very much. Anybody else before I hand it back to Steve for the poll and final comments?
Maybe I'll just react briefly on
Yes.
that question
Yeah.
as well, on a bit of a different angle, on a more implementation. How do we communicate multilingual knowledge or perspectives such as that? And I didn't think I mentioned it when I showed the video, but I wanted to mention that, I mean, commonly you have such a YouTube video with the subtitles. I think you could read the subtitles in English, and you can add a button and translate it into many different languages. So somehow that strikes me as, maybe it's just because that's the way videos are often multi-subtitled, but it seems like that's a good way to take a shared definition or understanding of the concept that's portrayed in a video and then allow it to be looked at in multiple languages. But that's only one, that's coming at it only from the knowledge consumption side. And I think what would even be better is that the video doesn't just depict the sort of text analysis based definition of data, but the story that the video tells is that data is got a lot more meaning and nuance than you might realize if you only read the text-driven analysis finding. In fact, in Bangla, it means this, and you can depict that in an image a bit more what it really looks like at the community level. And in another language, in another community, you have a little screen, depicting what that really looks like. And so I think with the combination of words and this images or videos or some kind of multimedia and translations, you can really start to get at, okay, wow, there's a lot packed into just one concept when we look at it from different perspectives. So I think there's like, a next level that the videos can go to really incorporate those language aspects.
Right. Thank you very much. We have 2 people who would like to contribute. May I request Joseph to please come first?
Let's wrap it up.
Thank you for the inputs, and I think probably this is the first time I'm getting into this discourse, and really happy to see how you look at building in the concepts. In fact, I come from an organization called CASA, which is a hardcore localization-based organization where we have enhanced or strengthened the capacity of many local NGOs. We directly implement, we relate with NGOs. We also have a project on strengthening the local capacities. Having said this, the whole terminology of localization, whether that itself is highly a local terminology is a big question for us. But having said this, recently I have been in some of the discussions where one thing which I find in all those discussions is, I'm not talking about ADRRN in international discourses, the global standards. What is the essence of that? I argued that the whole architecture is international. You're talking of localization. Why do you want to have the global standards? Why can't you reverse it with trying to understand a community standard and then build upon that to bring it to the global level? So in that way, I find this whole concept of this humanitarian insert very interesting, and probably one thing which we may also have to look at it is how to build in this community standards. Each community may have their own standards. Even I always feel, some of the assessments we do for in my response, it's highly one-sided. It's based on funding. You go and ask a person how the disaster has affected you, all this blah, blah, blah. But the first and fundamental thing, if you want to understand the resilience of them, you should understand whether there was a disaster, what is your understanding, or have you been affected? We don't start with that. We just start with have you been affected and force them to tell that, yes, I'm affected like this. So probably we need to look at the resilience and then link up standards and try to look at a way for it. Another big why this is important is even in the understanding of localization, I also find some of the INGOs who strongly advocate for localization focusing more on capacity strengthening. Local NGOs have capacity strengthening, how we define their capacity, that's also an area of thing, because we believe there should be a convergence. The due diligence mechanism or other standards should come down from the INGOs, come a level below, and a level up has to be done by the local NGOs. The local NGOs should not completely come to the level of INGOs. There is a convergence we should be talking about, and how this concepts and standards fits into this is something that I'm interested to look at. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. There's a question to you from Takeshi. When you said community standards, did you mean minimum standards like?
Oh, no, Joseph said global standards, but I just want to say like global minimum standards like Sphere is what you meant, right?
See, Sphere also, we talk of Sphere and we contextualizing it in at the in local level, but how many of the local NGOs have been part of it? I do not know at the present. There was a time then we were in the 8th edition or something that I was involved in translating it in the regional language. Okay. This was somewhere in 10 years ago, but after that I do not know. But there are certain government standards. There are certain locally, certain things might be different from the community. Are we making an attempt to understand that also? That's my question.
Yeah. No, I agree.
You might think this is what is standard, but their understanding of standard could be different.
Yeah.
Because we have a lot of local supports coming into emergencies, and in that context, how do they understand that, and what strengthening there is needed?
Thank you.
So
in the interest of time, any quick reflections, Manu? Then I want to move to Shivangi and then back to Steve. Alex, please.
I'll be very brief. A quick reaction because it's a great question, and I think we can't do it justice, so it needs to be discussed further. But it's very interesting because the Sphere project, who look at the global standards and have been trying, I think for a number of years to try and get this sort of local element to those standards as well, and work out how that. They're also very interested in the Encyclopedia project, and they're on our advisory board and looking to partner in some way. And I think one interesting potential idea is that they have these concepts in the language of the standards and the handbooks that could be cross-linked to the encyclopedia. So one is, okay, here's the standard, but behind the standard is a rich debate of the meanings and concepts. And then the other point is there's a section in each concept entry that we haven't been able to sort of fill with too much information on most of the concepts, but I think it holds potential. It's a section about different measures and standards that sort of enact the concept or enumerate the concept, and that might be a place where, you know, we can log or catalog. Well, there's different community standards of this global concept in many different, you know, measures, different, you know, there's different thresholds in different places because of cultural differences or weather differences or whichever it is. So yeah, anyway, it's a very rich question and lots to think about there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. While we are warming up, I would like to invite Shivangi for her inputs and then back to Steve. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nupur. And first of all, congratulations to ADRR and the collaborators for this wonderful initiative. And the first thing that crossed my mind was that we do views from the front line. And we do go to the communities and we have a hard time to explain what disaster means, what inclusion means, what are the barriers of inclusion. And those are some typical questions that we do ask over a period of so many years we have been. And we need to, I think this will become really very important for us, this encyclopedia, when we get it translated into various local languages. And I really look forward for that, that to translate into action, you know, the work that is being compiled. So really very thrilled and excited to see that this is coming in, because it becomes very handy when we are asked these questions. What do we mean by inclusion? Like communities who don't understand those things, you know, they feel those things, they understand those things, but in their common parlance that they talk. So I think it's really just not to take much time, but I think for our next views from the front line, I think we will highly depend on this encyclopedia to take some of those concepts and translate them into the local languages. So thank you, just wanted to contribute on that.
Thank you. Any quick thoughts? Alex, would you like to respond to that, or?
No, I agree. It's a really valid point.
We
So
all agree.
thank you.
I think we really wish that Alex's vision is put to reality and all of this is going to happen. So thank you very much once again for actively participating. This is how it happens. We warm up towards the end. That's why as a facilitator, one feels, oh, we need to continue. And, you know, such important points have come up which need more deliberations. But we've already crossed the time. So I'll hand it back to Steve for the next quick poll. And that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Nupur, for taking us through this very interesting and very, learning exercise for all of us. I'm sure everybody enjoyed. This was just a little teaser. There is a full session in the Humanitarian Partnership Network week coming up in Bangkok. So all those who are going to be there, please do join that session. Maybe in the larger hall, we will have more inputs coming in. And so as we get into further development, we will see how we can also add some of those inputs into developing a broad roadmap for the way forward. But for now, thank you very much. We are sorry we have exceeded by our time a little bit, but you've all stayed together, which is great. But I know for Takeshi, it's late in the evening for you and for many others as well. So we'll, without any further time to say goodbye to everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.